this slightly overcast day. And welcome to the Climate Change, How Can We Act on It speaker session or talk, whatever you want to call it. So I'm gonna start with a short intro spiel on this. I'm sure you're all aware climate change is an issue that has no bounds when it comes to who and what it affects. And I think it's safe to say that it affects all of us. And there's no point in denying that things haven't been going very well. And the fact that it doesn't go very well is the thing that keeps me up at night, wondering how these changes are going to affect me, my friends, and possibly my future kids and family. This is a time-related issue, and I pray that people around me really do see the imperative nature of what we need to do before some of these effects become practically irreversible. While I do mention how important it is to act now, though, I want to look at the time we have to act as something valuable and something worth putting more thought into. We don't have forever to work on what we can do to help, but we have the time to help things change forever. I wanted to put this out there because this is what I want people to have when looking at their takeaways for this talk. I see in your mostly open cameras, determined faces that represent people who want to act on something as socially relevant as the climate crisis and have an idea of how they would want to do something like that. But I know that many people may not have such an easy time figuring out what they can do to help and how they would be able to make a difference in their own special way. Sometimes that door to understanding how we can make a difference can seem blocked shut and the knob is just out of reach. In that case, I decided to bring a few guests here today to help unlock that door for those who want to help but aren't sure how, and even for those who want to help but don't have the confidence for their own ideas. These people, everyone here, need to know that this realm of opportunity is open for them, because honestly, it always has been. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. I've had the privilege of working with her for almost a year now, and needless to say, she's become a prominent inspiration in my life. She studied anthropology and has a doctorate in that subject from Leiden University in the Netherlands. So she's technically a doctor. While her studies have been in anthropology, her heart is really in her writing. Her poems and essays have been published in different anthologies and books, and she has even authored several books, including a children's book. Working with her and the rest of the Agam Agenda team have shown me that women can have strong voices in the struggle to create awareness on the issue of climate change. Please welcome our first speaker, Padma Perez, Dr. Padma Perez.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Pilar, for that wonderful opening and setting the tone for all of us. Good afternoon. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm going to start sharing my screen for you. There we go. So Pilar asked me to share with everyone this afternoon what we do at the Agam Agenda. And what we really are about is finding and amplifying stories of hope. These are a few fancy words describing who we are and what we do. So we're a dynamic shape-shifting platform. We take our inspiration from the octopus, and we convene writers, artists, scientists, youth, and campaigners for creative transdisciplinary collaboration. One way of describing what we do is that we try to propagate and encourage science-art activism. So while we're inspired by the octopus, we also talk a lot about spreading our spores. And we'll get to what we mean by science-art activism a little later on. So I wanted to start with what you know. So please feel free to chime in the chat box or unmute yourself if you have something to say. I wanted to ask you, what you know about climate change. What do you already know about climate change? And what you know about how it's going to affect the future. So unmute yourself if you want to say something, or please drop a few words, a phrase, a word in the chat box. We'll wait a bit because I do really want to have an indication of where you're at on this. Pilar, you might want to get the ball rolling.
Anyone? You can also raise your hand if you're afraid of speaking over somebody.
I won't buy, and I can't even if I wanted to. Because I'm here and you're there.
Don't worry, everyone. Padma's super nice.
Okay, from Ryan Bautista, we have climate change is the most pressing issue of our time because it's existential and affects everyone. Thank you. But how and why is it a pressing issue? What are its effects going to be? Judging from Ryan's answer, you already know a lot, I think, about climate change. And while you're thinking about this, I know that sometimes it can look very grim. So we talk a lot about stronger typhoons or droughts, new diseases, water shortages, hunger, increased poverty, and so on. Thank you, Michaela, Seraphica. It's negatively affecting many species of wildlife and it amplifies natural disasters. Did someone want to speak? Loss of biodiversity, increasing frequency and intensity of natural disasters, overall health decline. Great, yes, all true and all to be expected and all very grim. And sometimes it's easier to tell ourselves that we'll be okay, actually. We won't be affected as badly as others. And if we are able to think that or say that, it's because we speak from a position of privilege, and whether or not we will be affected and how badly, or no, if we allow ourselves to think that we won't be affected as badly as others, it's good to remember that that may or may not be true. But this is also a time for exciting changes, not just terrible ones. We're seeing exciting changes in renewable energy, small things happening, small but meaningful things like community gardens, people working in ecological restoration, new jobs being created, again, like I said, in the renewable energy sector, banks moving away from investing in coal, and so many different forms of connectedness and solidarity are appearing in these difficult times. So it may be a grim future, but it's also an exciting future, and it's that uncertainty that we're trying to embrace in the Agam Agenda. That uncertainty is not something to be afraid of, it's something that's a source of hope for all of us, because it means we can still do something meaningful so that we can all thrive in the future. Okay, so I want to ask you to think about how we can start rewriting our futures. And I want to ask you to take a moment to think of something you really, really want but can't have yet. It could be as simple as a chocolate cake that you want right now, or it could be something grand like studying in an Ivy League school, or traveling to Europe, or gender equality, or an end to hunger. Maybe it's a driver's license sense? Gaming console, t-shirts or headphones, or a special dish with ingredients that are hard to find at this time. Maybe it's a book that's not available here. Maybe it's just not the right time, or maybe your parents said wait till you're older. Maybe you're saving up for it. What is this one specific thing you want so badly you think about it all the time? Okay, you have it. You know what this thing is that you really, really want. So just hold on to that thought because we'll come back to it later. Okay. So one way we're rewriting our futures at the Agam Agenda is we're widening the storytelling circle. Oops, there we go. So in 2014, or in 2013 rather, the photos you see here by the photojournalist Jose Enrique Soriano were sent out as writing prompts to writers, poets, anthropologists, scientists from all over the Philippines, from north to south. And the contributors weren't told anything except that these were photos of people who have survived or who are surviving the impacts of climate change. And we were told, I also contributed to this, we were told that this was for a book on climate change, and we weren't allowed to use jargon in writing about climate change. So we were given a list of words we couldn't use, and the first word on that list was climate change. So it was a really interesting thought exercise to look at these faces and these people and imagine the realities they face and to tell stories about climate change and these people without using the jargon of climate change, without even saying climate change. And the result of that was this book, Agam, Filipino Narratives on Uncertainty and Climate Change, and it has 26 images, 24 narratives in verse and prose in 8 Philippine languages. And it's a multi-awarded book. So this was the first, I think, Agam Big Bang in 2014. And this year, we're releasing another exciting anthology called Harvest Moon, Poems and Stories from the Edge of the Climate Crisis, and it contains 9 languages, 30 photographs, and 30 climate narratives in poetry and prose from 24 countries in Asia, Africa, the Pacific, and Latin America. I think it will interest you to know that our youngest contributor is a young girl. She was 12 at the time she wrote her contribution, and her name is Lila MacLeod, and she lives in Cape Town in South Africa. And in her contribution, she writes about how her activism started at home when she insisted and told her parents that they should stop bringing plastic bags into their home. And she writes in the first paragraph in all caps, "It's so hard." And I like that she acknowledges that it's not easy to make these changes. And then she tells of how her actions expand to other things like choosing to walk or cycle instead of taking the car. And she joins school drive and the climate march in Cape Town. I'm sure you've all heard of the Fridays for Future strikes and Greta Thunberg. So she joined the one in Cape Town. And that's how our editor for Africa, Rehana Rousseau, an esteemed journalist, got to know her and asked her to contribute to the book. We are contributors, and these are some of the most beautiful lines from the many stories we have from Kenya, Nepal, Colombia, India, Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, from the Philippines, we have contributors as well. In fact, we have a contributor, Gawani Domogo from Saga. Maybe some of you have been there or are planning to go there in the future. When you do, check out Gaia Cafe and you might meet Gawani there. And she writes in Kankanae, in her own indigenous language. One of my favorite lines is this one here at the bottom. We will be the gods and goddesses whose stories are told. And that's a line from a story written by a Turkish writer, and the title of the story is called Algae House. And the person who speaks this is a girl in her teens who's living in a world very, very different from the one we're in now, but she's surviving and she's thriving enough that she can dream of myths and legends about her in the future. And this is a dream we can all have and we can all want. It's not exclusively for fantasy or for writers or for heroes and heroines. One of the other things we do at the Agam Agenda is we have a podcast where we feature interviews with some of the best Filipino writers. This is really another way to get to know our literature and our writers and how they are confronting the climate crisis and writing about it in their work and in their poetry. So here you see Criselda Yabes in the upper left corner. She is a journalist and a novelist. Marjorie Evasco is a poet on the right, and below her is Joel Saracho, who's an actor and a theater director, a dramaturg. And in the last photo is Richie Balagos, who is the editor-in-chief, or the literary editor, of Bisaya magazine, which is one of the foremost magazines of the language, Binisaya. So while we're on the podcast, I'd like to invite the teachers that are with us this afternoon to please check it out. It's another way to introduce our literature and climate change and poetry and fiction and journalism to our students. So please do see if there's something here that you can use. Okay, let's get to some other examples of science art activism. This one is a crochet coral reef, and it was initiated by the Wertheim twins, who founded the Institute for Figuring. And the Wertheim twins are mathematicians and physicists. One of them is a mathematician, one of them is a physicist. They're poets and they're artists, and they started this collaborative project where they invited people to crochet pieces of coral as a way of confronting the bleaching of coral and the warming and acidification of our oceans. So they started with a small, simple idea using string theory and asked people to crochet with yarn these pieces that you see in this photo. And then they opened the call for collaboration, and they started getting submissions from all over the world. I think the present count is 8,000 contributions from all around the world, and people started using plastic or old pieces of tape to crochet these corals to really draw awareness, but also to create a feeling of connection between the person who is crocheting this and thinking about coral reefs and hoping to make a statement with that simple contribution. This is an example of a pebble poem that was created by the students of Marjorie Evasco at La Salle. And this is part of a project called Poets for Science, where young writers, or anybody actually, is encouraged to write a poem that's based on a scientific fact. So this one goes: the air we breathe, the air we need, the A. And you can imagine what happens when the poem just suddenly stops there. Here's another example, humbak. And when I first encountered this, I admit I didn't know what humbak was, but the poem says it all. Nobody cared what I was until 10 meters tall, I swallowed all. So that's from the same class that Marjorie Evasco taught in La Salle. And we're going to be rolling this out, so if this catches your interest, you might be able to submit a pebble poem for Poets for Science in the very near future. Another example is the Alas ng Bayan exhibit, which Red will talk about a little bit because this was also done by ICSC in collaboration with the Constantino Foundation and 350.org. But it's an exhibit that featured 3 women in Philippine history who fought for sovereignty and who protected their communities and their territories in their own way. This one here shows Gloria Capitan, who was an anti-coal activist and a human rights defender affiliated with Coal-Free Bataan. I'm speaking of her in the past tense because she was assassinated in July 2016 by unidentified men. So she is another figure in history that in her story, in her life, she brings together climate change, community, history, science, and activism. And she made the ultimate sacrifice for this, and we honor her for that through Alas ng Bayan, as well as 4 other women. And I encourage you again, this is another way to approach our history and to see another aspect of our history, celebrating our women warriors. So check out alasnangbayan.org to see more of this work and to learn more about the women that are honored by this exhibit. And this shows a board where we invited students to create their own sketches of Apollonia Catra, who is the only named woman officer of Macario Sakay's forces. And there are hardly any existing records of her, no photos. So people were invited to imagine what she might have looked like. And this board shows some of those examples in PUP. Finally, we are currently running an activity or a campaign called Letters from Nature, where we are inviting submissions from anyone, including you, if you're interested, to write a letter from nature. So if you were something else besides human, if you were an animal or a plant or some element present in nature, what would you be? And what would you have to say to humans? So the links are here, and we can drop them in the chat box for you if you want to check them out and participate. So let's look now at doing climate science art activism. How are you going to do this? Can you do it? Yes, it's for anybody and for everybody. And you start with what matters to you. Everybody knows something important, and everybody has something that really, really matters to them. What is that thing that you want? When we started, what were you thinking of when I asked you to think of a thing that you really, really want? So think of that thing again, and now ask yourself, what changes if you consider that what you want will be or is already being affected by climate change? And ask yourself, what if what you want will affect climate change? Maybe we can all start there. Maybe the things we want need to change as well. Next is you learn something new. Silos narrow the horizon of possibilities, so branch out from your own interests, read from many different sources. Don't stick to just your favorite subject. See what you can learn from other subjects and what you can use there. You know, look into anything that interests you. Be curious and approach things sideways. Red is going to talk about this more. So we practice flipping processes and shifting our frames of reference. Sometimes finding a solution or something exciting to do is just a matter of changing angles when you're looking at something. You can use resources at hand, collaborate and improvise, and make things. Let your imagination go wild, but always stay grounded on facts, because that's where we rely on science to tell us what the current facts are. Of course, that will change. Science is always teaching us new things, and it's always exciting to try and express that creatively or differently without the jargon. Did I miss? Yes, okay. And make it shareable, replicable, and scalable. So think of tentacles growing, reaching, sensing. If other people want to join in, that's great. If other people want to do the same thing in their own space, that's great. Invite others to play always. Be open to finding, in fact, don't just be open to unlikely allies and playmates, but go and find them. And celebrate uncertain outcomes. There will be failures, but there will also be surprise and delight. And rinse and repeat. So you can join us as we tell our stories and change the conversations around the climate crisis. And this is how we're reshaping the future. This is our agenda. Thank you so much. And you'll be hearing from Red soon. I just wanted to say that the Agam Agenda is a special project of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. So thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Padma, for introducing everyone to the concept of science-art-activism, because I believe not a lot of people know what that is. So Padma mentioned earlier that there were some literature forums that you could contribute to, and the links of which are in the chat right now. So if you want to help contribute to the science art activism movement of climate change, then feel free to submit whatever works you have to Letters for Nature, which is probably the most current thing we have going on right now. And then glad Padma kind of started the segue for the next speaker already, which is wonderful. So our next speaker is Renato Redentor Constantino, or we call him Red in ICSC for short. So Red is the executive director of ICSC, or what Padma said earlier, the Institute of Climate and Sustainable Cities. He's the big boss, the big guy. And Red's experience with working on issues surrounding climate change spans over 30 years at this point. And he has worked with organizations all around Asia and the Philippines, like Greenpeace, and now he's working with ICSC. Aside from leading different organizations, he's also a writer who has published several different books and countless articles, and he also paints, so more art for us. So Red is a man of many talents, and we're lucky to have him as our guest speaker for today. So I actually feel grateful for the fact that he said yes to this. So please join me in giving a warm welcome from our Keys School to our next speaker, Red.
Pilar, thank you very much. Hello to everyone. Hello again to Teacher Sandy and all the faculty of Key School, all the students who found time to join this brief sharing from ICSC. It's an honor to speak to all of you. Even more, a greater pleasure to speak after Padma, and even happier to be introduced by Pilar. By way of context, this presentation is actually meant to provide you a picture of where the Agam agenda that Padma discussed earlier, where it's located. This bigger house. But also by way of context, I think it's really important also to share to all of you that while I try to manage all the things that I'm going to show to you shortly, it is a fact. It's a widely known secret or open secret among my colleagues that the work that Pilar is doing with Padma and Carissa is something that I would rather do than do the other stuff that I'm about to show you. What they're doing, what they're chasing with the Agam agenda is the thing that interests me the most. And so I try to find time as much as I can, not just to contribute to us, but to actually get inspired by the work that they're doing. So my task is to give you an idea about what exactly ICSC is. I'd like to start by just stating a really big principle. There were times when I was your age where I was also wondering with my friends what a young person's desire to take on the greatest challenges in the world. And sometimes we discuss, what if we were born during the time of the First or Second World War? What an exciting time that would be, knowing the hardship, knowing the pain, but also knowing the valiant causes that were in front of us. And afterwards, there was, of course, different other phases. You have more wars in the future, after that, Vietnam, Iraq, but also our own history, including a difficult period during the dictatorship before the democratic order came in. Today, we're in the middle of one of the biggest challenges that the world has ever faced. As I think one of your classmates, Ryan Bautista, had said, echoed by another classmate, we're facing the biggest problem there is in the world right now. And there is no other time that I think would be more exciting than the period that you're living through right now. Not just because of the pandemic, but because you are in a position right now to do even better than everyone else has done before. Because in a sense, we're not, Padma and I and your teachers, maybe your parents as well, we're not necessarily just fighting for a future that you will inherit. You are going to be in this situation soon based on the future of your own kids. Because everything that we do now will matter and everyone will count. And unlike the other crises before, where we had the luxury of being spectators or just watching things from afar, however dangerous or concerning they were, the crisis we're facing at the moment will affect everyone, including those who are not in this world yet. And so I'm really happy to be able to show you facets of the work that we do. Padma's given you one of the more exciting ones as well. About us, it's a simple explanation. We are a strange group because we are based in Manila, but our coverage is international. And so we advise about 48 governments around the world. Our home base is in the Philippines, in Quezon City, to be more specific, in a place in between restaurants in the Morato area. We have a satellite office in Tacloban. Long after humanitarian teams and really great relief and rehabilitation organizations had left Tacloban after the great big storm of 2013, we decided to set up a facility there to stay so that we can roll out programs that would show others why a certain pathway is far better than where we're currently headed. And so the pictures you see in front of you are the things that we deal with. They don't represent the entirety of the good things that people are trying to push in this country. By far, no. But we also believe that we all have our own small things to contribute, and that is what counts. If you have something to share, share it. And if you have something to to benefit from as well. Don't just benefit from it, point others as well. You see the example of the community pantries right now. That's just the latest of what is, has been going on throughout our history, especially in recent years. Never forget and never think that these are just new occurrences. Sometimes we just pay attention to what's in front of us without seeing that there's been examples of this throughout. We just need to see them better. What is it that ICSC does exactly? We're divided into a number of different teams. One of them deals with climate governance, another deals with urban transitions and energy policy. But as the preceding slide, I think, also showed to you, as we're trying to advance fair climate policy and low carbon climate resilient development, we also insist on something very, very specific, which is that while climate change is probably the biggest, most serious existential threat we've ever faced by we, the world, and our country, our people, it is also not necessarily the most important. Because in our context, the struggles are real. The struggles for better health, struggles against poverty, quality education and access to other social services, jobs, livelihoods, hunger. These are not less important than climate change. They're just as important because it spells doom or opportunity for the working households in the country. And by principle as well, it spells out a certain truth that I think only a few actually try to spell out, which is that our government, especially our communities, are not expecting climate change mitigation or better climate adaptation or specializations that are overly focused on climate change on its own. What our people expect is better development. And by better development, it means that many of the things that we need to be doing may not be spelled out as climate change responses, but they will add up because everything counts. So when we work on climate governance, we're also saying that the work on agriculture, for instance, or on food security is important because in the end, it's not only impacted by the climate crisis, but we also get to contribute to the global fight if we advance, for instance, sustainable agriculture, if we pay more attention to the benefits of organic food, if we ensure that water is adequately provided, not just in terms of drinking, but also irrigation. If we ensure that the things that are important to people, even without the climate crisis, is able to contribute to the larger global good. So we're running urban transitions also because in the urban area, a lot of the impacts take place, but a lot of the opportunities also are present there. It's the source, cities are the source of, I think, about 70% of the global emissions. People often don't see that. That also means that the cities are, in effect, markets for change, but also create, embody huge areas for potential change across the economy. Mobility, for instance, in terms of transport, food, resilience, better technology, and aggregated economies that allow people to be more efficient and to enjoy neighborhoods that are sustainable and at the same time contribute again to the global climate fight. Energy policy is another. As we shift towards cleaner energy, more sustainable forms of energy, and leave the obsolete past behind that was so dependent on what was harming us and what continues to harm us in the form of fossil fuels, we get to modernize our power sector. Maybe we get to make electricity more affordable. Certainly we'll provide access to more and more households. Climate finance is another because you can't really move without the economy, and finance will be key. Who gets it? Who gets the money, when and how much is, of course, one of the bigger challenges. It's not just about raising money, because if you raise money and it happens to show up tomorrow by magic, if you don't have plans, it will get stolen, it will get dissipated or wasted. So we need to make sure that plans are in place for the long run as well. And we need to take a longer view so that when resources are mobilized, there's a way to actually make sure that it's spent better. Communications. There's a lot of things that we can say about this in terms of news, features, stories, and so on. The kind of communications that I think is really lacking still is what Agam Agenda, Padma, Carissa, and Pilar, and Julia are all trying to pursue, which is to connect science and policymaking and use the humanities in which to create conversations with specific publics. We're also running an energy access program, and I'll tell you more about this later. That's the one in Tacloban, where we run a hybrid solar geothermal facility and train climate change survivors. Lastly, as much as the exciting part of the work has been explained by Padma and by Pilar, we're also running what might be a less exciting but equally complex and challenging program under what we call diplomacy, because we work with finance ministers and we work with environment and foreign affairs ministers in order to drive changes and collaboration across smaller countries. Individually, these countries like the Philippines or Mali or Bangladesh or Marshall Islands, they're small, almost inconsequential. But together, the emissions are bigger than Russia's, and the population is 1.2 billion. 2 billion by 2030 is the projection. And so how do we make them coalesce and come together and ensure that they can be ants leading the elephants? That's part of the charge that ICSC is trying to chase. Hopefully with the work that will also get underway internationally, again led by the Octopus and the Agam Agenda team. Why is this so important? Because as much as we work with some of the country's top economists and top climate scientists and top policymakers using science and the best of technical prowess, it's not enough. It hasn't been enough. And because the crisis is worsening, we've always said, and we will keep saying, that now is when the poets are really needed. The artists, the poets, the singers, the literary people, the ones who are in a position to create the conversations that matter, encourage our kababayans to create their own stories and to tell them, and thus make our forces stronger and larger in a far quicker time. Why? Because we think that we will eventually end up in the right landing zone, an economy that is thriving and prosperous and safe. The question is not the landing zone. Our challenge is, can we get to that landing zone sooner? Can we get there earlier? Can we shave off 5, 7, or 10 years from long campaigns so that we can reduce harm and introduce opportunities far sooner? That's why we have Agam. Padma already explained this. It was our pioneering effort, won a number of book awards, launched all over the world, the key cities, Washington, Berkeley, New York, Denver, Berlin, Bonn, etc., all the major cities in the Philippines. As a start, and Padma is doing book 2 now, and is actually already doing book 3 with the help of Carissa as well and Julia. Pilar is also part of that. So you're giving birth to many, it's like Avengers Part 5 and Part 6. We're just finishing with the first one, but we're already underway with new creations. Because we can do it, because we must. This is the team that comprises the other side of the scientists and economists, because the best poets in the country and in other regions are going to be critical in this fight. Joey Bakiran, Marge Evasco, Ravi Sunico, Grace Monte de Ramos, and so many more. And we will include soon from Asia, from India, from Turkey, Africa, and so on. That's also why we're using different forms of art. As Padma had said earlier, we had initiated with a number of organizations collaborating the exhibit called Alas ng Bayan. Why? It's not because we're in an artist group, but also because the objective is to create connections between people in the minds and conversations among one another. We need to see connections and develop angles, because ultimately what we want is to develop and establish conversations that go beyond simple policy making that seems abstract or disconnected from what the public really desires. So on the left screen, you see a painting and a write-up about Commander Liwayway, Remedios Gomez Paraiso, who was a fighter against the Japanese occupiers during World War II. She's famous because she's also called the Black Widow. She'd wear red lipstick before hopping on her horse with pistol in hand, makeup and really pretty dress as she would describe herself, and then go off to fight the Japanese invaders. That's a connection that we've already lost, and which Alas ng Bayan and Agam, the Agam Agenda, is trying to restore. Because our history is not just about a nation, but it's about ecology. It's about people. It's about heroes. And when it comes to heroes, there is no dictionary in the world that spells heroes with the letters M-E-N. It's not a male-dominated past. It's a past where women dominated it. I suspect that our challenge is to find out more of their names and faces and recreate as much as we can so that people like Gloria Capitan, who was the first extrajudicial killing victim under the current government, will be remembered, and that we will all be inspired by people like Commander Liwayway or Oriang de Jesus and others. Why is it that we do this, and why do we do what we do? Because also the organization is recruiting based on certain principles that would allow us to evolve in a better way. Of the entire organization, half are 35 years old and below, and I think 60%, probably more, are women by choice, because we are ensuring that diversity helps us evolve to become a more effective campaigning force, certainly a happier team. Also because our interests of individuals are things that we bring to the table. So if Pilar makes music, others make art. Others are great in reading or criticism. Others dance and so on. You all contribute something important to the greater cause. Specialization is important, but the ability to combine and integrate all of this and express yourself is probably even more critical. In ICSC, we encourage all the staff, everyone, to be politically active in their individual lives. We don't really run all the campaigns that matter in the world, but our staff do, because they are pursuing different things. So, for instance, if Pilar was a staff member right now, as others have done before, and she requested me for a leave, as others have, in order for her to join an LGBTQ parade or rally, I would decline her request for a leave, because I would say it is your obligation to represent ICSC there. You will not take a leave. That is official work for you. Go there and invite the rest of the organization and bring them and make them see better. That is the kind of chemistry that we're promoting, because the challenges we need to overcome have different angles in terms of their solutions. In mobility, for instance, very few understand that in the greater Metro Manila area, in fact, I suspect in the entire country, the same statistics holds true. 88% of households do not own their own cars. So why is it that our public works and infrastructure are so incredibly biased for motorists who own their own cars? In that sense, mobility is not a question of reducing emissions or fighting against climate change. It's a question of democracy. And if it's a question of democracy, the more that we try to operationalize what democracy looks like on our streets, the more we get to contribute to the climate fight as a co-benefit, not as the main pursuit. So we promote democracy by promoting inclusive and active mobility and cycling as commuting, pedestrians because walking is the best mode of transport. By doing so, we are promoting democracy but also contributing to the climate fight. One way that we've done that is to provide offer to government, and they've accepted different kinds of maps that show how interconnection can take place across different cities in Metro Manila, and pretty soon we'll do this nationwide as well as we run the National Mobility Awards, because government is listening, and if they don't, then we will find ways to make them listen. We are promoting people like the cyclists you see in front of you, because the cool thing right now is when you own a car, and that has to change, because the car is not something necessarily to be proud of if you're in Japan or in the Netherlands. It's not exactly the smartest investment move that you can make. Here, that's a mindset that we need to change. And if it's about mindsets, again, we need writers and artists and so on. There is a bunch of people that represent the groups that we train. We call them Solar Scholars. They are climate change survivors from Eastern Visayas, composed largely of women who have been taught and have learned not only how to develop and create and assemble community renewable energy systems, they've also been training others. They've been paying it forward. And the help that we provided to them is something that they've been trying to reciprocate in other communities so that others can learn faster. Last slide is simply a snapshot of some parts of our office. It's a big office, two-story house that reflects much of our sensibility. We have two kitchens because we love to eat all the time. We love to cook all the time. But also, it's a reflection of who we are, semi-open working spaces, times when many times when we do more than just pursue the agenda in our advocacy and help out others as well, because at the end of it all, life is about what we see in front of us, and if there are challenges, we can only surmount them together if we act together. And as young people, I hope you remain hungry for change, because even if you try to avoid it in the future, change will come knocking on your door, and you will have to answer at some point, will I sign up? Will I become more? And will I join others? Because joining others and being more is probably the most effective way that you can go about things, even as I hope you remain individual, proud, sunshine-rich people, young people who are out to change the future of this country and the world. That's simply a snapshot of our office. We've been on work from home since the lockdown in March last year. But the truth is, we've had this work from home policy, I think 2 years prior, even more, because that's what ICS is all about. In the end, if you have to turn in a report that's very complex, but which doesn't require you to be in the office, I don't really care if you're in a bathing suit surfing in La Union, as long as you turn in the report, and also that the learning and the experience is really in the field, not in the classroom necessarily, and not in the office. So celebrate one another, but also look out for different angles. And as I often say, be ready to lose your marbles and gain your bearings, because the world is a bewildering place, but it's out there for you. Stay curious, my young friends.
Thank you so much, Red. And I hope for everyone who was listening to the talk today that you were able to learn about a lot about, I guess, the many different ways you can help contribute to activism and just generally helping out with, I guess, all the different corners of this issue, because it's like what Red said, it's not exactly like as clear cut as some may make it out to be. We originally allotted the event to be around 2:30 to 3:30, which is around an hour, and we're already at around 3:27, so we do have a few minutes left. And if there's anyone here who has to go because they're busy, and if they have something at this time, they are free to do so. But I guess I probably should have approached a few people about this quietly. But if you, Red, and Padma are okay to stay for maybe like a couple of more minutes just to address the questions that some of the students may have about your talks or about ICSC or the Agam Agenda, would you be right with doing that?
Absolutely. And if you have the toughest questions, please come up with the toughest and make sure that you ask them, to post them to Padma. Padalan nyo kay Padma, not to me. Alam mo na, sabihin ko
Okay, so right before we get to those questions, I wanted to, I guess, sort of tie in both of those talks into a personal experience that I've had, and I guess sort of a conclusion and a few words that I have for students to take away from this talk today. And I've written it down here because sometimes I can get a little messy with my ideas. So this is technically the conclusion spiel that I came up with yesterday. Um, I've been reflecting on my journey as a creative individual, and I've been thinking about how Agam has been helping me express myself and my ideas a lot more than before. And I've learned a lot about art, music, and writing and leading during these past few months, and I sometimes wonder what I would have done without these lovely people that I've gathered here today. I can say that my journey with climate change activism started when I met Red and Padma and the rest of the team, but I believe that my journey with climate change activism started about 5 years ago. It all started with one idea. It was another day of my mind wandering while I tried to avoid schoolwork, and it was filled with a mess of fantasy and science fiction concepts that floated about, waiting to be given some kind of narrative structure. And my brain started coming up with these characters and dramatic moments, and the idea of an epic sci-fi fantasy tale was born. But the idea meant a lot more to me than just story. Being 12 at the time, I drew a lot of inspiration from my favorite characters on television, mostly from the cartoon shows that I watched, like Steven Universe. I felt like these shows were groundbreaking because they weren't willing to play it safe when tackling social issues. The creators that created these televised shows gave a voice to different communities like the LGBTQ plus community and countless minorities and social struggles that have been represented in the shows that I saw. But I always took issue with the cartoons that I saw on TV because I was always wondering where climate change was in all of that. An issue that has cost so many lives with its effects, from the typhoons that wash our towns away to the bleaching of corals and the acidification of oceans. I could go on and on about how many things were happening related to the issue, but not a lot of people were talking about it, and especially kids like me. Maybe because there just aren't any shows, or there weren't any shows at the time that could start the conversation. My nerd mind really couldn't handle the thought that people might be brushing the climate crisis under the rug because it wasn't being prominently represented in the mainstream media. So I took my epic fantasy and immediately slapped a goal onto it. One goal that I would use as a point for starting new projects. And that was to make a statement about climate change and create awareness for it. And I wanted to make awareness about it, just like my favorite cartoon showrunners with countless other social issues. There was never really anything wrong with the idea of starting a project like this, but it never came to fruition because I put so many unnecessary expectations on it. The project was called Heartbreakers, and I'm not going to get into why it's called that. And I even submitted it as my IU project for 4 consecutive years. So at least I was able to use it for something and got a grade out of it. It took me that long to realize that an animated series, a fully animated one at best, isn't exactly something one person can pull off on their own. Projects like these are typically made by dozens of professional people in the industry, and I was just asking too much of myself. And so then I was left with an unfinished project and a backlog of all sorts of other ideas that I had. And there's a lot of doubt coming from the thought that I wanted to make a difference, but didn't have a way to do so. I think I missed the fact that I needed to put in a lot more collaborative effort to make something like that work. More importantly, I needed to work with people that felt the same as I did, which was using art as a form of activism for climate change. I can't explain the amount of relief that I had when I found ICSC and through them the Agam Agenda. I no longer felt that my idea of using art as a form of climate change activism was something I had to act upon alone. I started working on the Agam Agenda project, and I've been contributing art to their Instagram and working on a review for Harvest Moon, their latest book. And they've given me the opportunity to attend talks and forums by artists and writers who have used their art to create awareness for climate change. I wanted to briefly talk about my contributions to Agam because I want you to know that you can use your own special talents and skills to make a statement worth listening to. I look back on my past self working on Heartbreakers and see someone who completely ignored the fact that what she needed to make something special was there all along. The truth of the matter is you don't have to be good at animating, writing, or music to make something good or even more so beautiful. You have to embrace the fact that you already have something you're good at, and that really the only thing that's standing in the way of you making that thing is yourself. I hope you know now that I've kind of rambled on about this, is that everyone is good at something. So I guess the only question now I have for everyone is, what are y'all waiting for? That's the end of my conclusion spiel. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. So I guess now is time for the questions for those who are still here to ask both you, Red, and Padma. Anything about what you do and the things you talked about today. So anyone can just unmute themselves or raise their hand if they have anything to ask or say about this. Don't worry, you can take your time.
Hi, hi, I'm Didi Manahan. I'm the head of Key School Manila. I'd like to thank Padma and Red for coming this afternoon. When Pilar broached the idea of having you over, I thought it was a great opportunity for the Keys community. We have had a long tradition of trying to have kids view experiences or even disciplines in a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary fashion, and I'm so grateful for an organization like this. The idea of science and art activism that gives kids a model to see, the value of having this kind of lens. I mean, these multiple lenses at looking at a situation. I was also telling Pilar that for the longest time, we part of the school agenda, and any proper school agenda is really to institute or to create opportunity for change, and addressing the sustainable goals, and of course climate change has always been in our agenda, but there has not been the heart to take it off. It is often in the mind, and a school project. And I told Pilar, maybe this is an opportunity because it's through art, it's through another medium that kids will be able to explore the issues behind climate change. I'm enthralled, and I'd love to have a copy of the collection, the Agam collection of stories. I was already thinking that, we need to have a collection, apart from Agam, a genre collection of transdisciplinary literature. That because I think one of the main reasons why we don't think about climate change, why we don't think about all of the other issues pushed by the UN for sustainability, is that we do not know how to make connections, and our world has always been unilateral, always looking through one lens instead of several lenses. So many ideas popped in my head, and thank you very much, really, for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you for having us.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Yeah, please, regards to Ravi. I knew him from many years ago when his son was in preschool.
Okay. What I can just tell the students also, and if you do have comments or questions, just throw them right now. But one thing I'd really like to leave with you is that I think at your age, you're still trying to form or choose or determine what course you'll take and what you would probably want to be once you finish university, or once you start working. I would request you strongly, and I hope you remember this when it comes time to make the decisions, the tougher and tougher decisions which you'll face more often. If you decide to pursue a career in the sciences, in biology, for instance, or botany, please don't lose your poetry. Don't let go of music. If you're an avid reader of Tolkien or Ursula Le Guin or graphic novels, don't lose that. Don't drop it. It is a bad exchange. It is not even an exchange. You will need all of that as you pursue your career in the sciences. Okay? If you decide to pursue a career in the theater arts or in music, or you decide that joining a band is your future, apart from whatever your parents might say, don't let go of science. Okay? Bring it with you. Bring that level of curiosity with you. Okay? Bring engineering with you. Bring design. Bring architecture. Bring whatever it is that interests you in terms of aesthetics and the humanities. You will need them as well, because the current generation, our generation, is dealing, as you are dealing, with the impact of the illusion that we can actually separate and specialize, and these things, will not have to meet at some point because we can all do things separately. That's the lie that we're all dealing with right now, because the world doesn't operate based on our specializations. Everything happens all at once. And even if you don't understand everything right away, or even if at all, then the world is far better because you'll be a constantly curious person. That's how the world changes. Not love, but stubborn people make the world go around. And I hope you will be among the most stubborn in this world. I think I saw teacher Luis Yoshan raise his hand. Do you still have time?
Sorry, hindi po. I was clapping.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Not to put you on the spot, teacher.
I also noticed that, well, maybe because I was multitasking while listening. When you presented the pie chart of the people involved with Agam, Pilar must be your youngest member. Is there a consideration of having a student group? Or is that something that you were probably thinking about, Pilar?
Well, I did bring it up specifically with the Agam Agenda team that I wanted the students. Well, I didn't have much time this week to plan it until today, but I wanted to introduce some kind of sharing forum for students to contribute their own art in a similar way that Agam Agenda has all these artists from around the world contributing their own pieces of art about climate change. And I don't exactly have all the logistics out for that yet, but I wanted to throw that out there because I wanted to build that sense of community that I was talking about earlier, with all the cartoons that I saw and how it brought all these people from different minorities together to talk about stuff. So that's a thing I could do over the summer, especially. No one will be working, maybe except for the IB students who have work all the time, me included. So yeah.
But tell Teacher Sandy and I how we can support you.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't quite know how to respond to that, but this has just been a great opportunity for ICSC and Keys to kind of converge here today to talk about climate change and how to act upon it. And it's 3:45. I'm so sorry for keeping everyone here. Even though it's been a very fruitful discussion, even after both Padma and Red, yeah, talking about their respective subjects that I gave them. But if there are no more questions, which I don't see any, yeah, I think there's one private question for me, which I will probably answer in an email. But I'd like to say thank you for everyone who joined here today. I hope you took something away from this. I hope that you feel inspired to do something, even though you don't feel like your craft isn't that good enough. And that's what you have all this time for as a student, is to learn how to build it. And that you have an entirely different perspective on climate change, and it's not just a scientific issue. It's also an issue of humanity that everyone can relate to in some way. So I guess that's it. Thank you, Padma and Red. One more thing before we end the session. I can just pull it up here. I think. Just a second. Sorry about that. So usually when we have guest speakers at Keys, we like to offer a certificate of appreciation for coming to speak here, and for giving something to the students during these kinds of events. Sorry, Teacher Didi, the file that has your signature on it is in a format where it's kind of flipped over, but Teacher Didi has signed this certificate of appreciation as well. So Padma and Red, thank you so much for agreeing to this event today. And once again, thanks to all the students who have stayed this long, and for listening to our listening to our insights.
Thank you, Pilar, for making this happen and for leading all of us through this.